presenting the Canoe and the Crown, and it's Canada's past and its path forward. Everybody, please welcome Eliot Pence. Thank you.
I feel like a bit of a fraud standing here, not least because Alex is a phenomenal speaker, and I learned more about Canada's history in space than really I ever have. And Dan obviously has a galactic view of what's happening today in Canadian procurement. But in addition to that, I don't really know anything about space. Certainly never been to space. I run a company that has no revenue, no contracts, and frankly, may never. But I'm kind of okay with that. And so when Rahul asked me to speak at this, I'm not sure if I told him or just thought this. I said, what the hell am I actually going to talk about? So I'm going to commit the worst sin of any speaker and actually read something that I wrote, this piece, The Canoe and the Crown, which I published on LinkedIn, as all tech bros do, expecting really nothing other than my mom to read it, which she didn't. But the Prime Minister did read it and referenced it and cited it. And I had the pleasure a couple of weeks ago of talking to him about it. So I will do that. But before I do that, I do think that the reason maybe that I'm here is that I know how to take risks. And I think anybody who operates in space takes immense risks. Everybody here is taking a huge risk. The country is taking a big risk. But most importantly, I think the founders are taking a big risk. Rahul in particular, but Bashar, James, others, Mina, those are the individuals that will pull the future forward. And I am excited to help support that in any way possible. I would say the other thing that happens, and the piece touches on this, is when countries take risks on entrepreneurs, on founders, you end up with the future being pulled forward rapidly. And you've seen this through history. In the 50s in Germany with the Mittelstands, in Japan with the OEMs seeding families and founders, had 10% compounded growth for 15 years. In the early 90s with the Baltics, obviously the US in early 2000s and to this day. And so really what this moment calls for, is for us to take a risk on our founders, on our entrepreneurs. And I think we have a leader now in Prime Minister Mark Carney that's willing to do that. And I'm certainly grateful for that. I began this journey about a year ago and didn't really know what I was getting into. I had never operated in Canada before. I had built a defense company in the US, was responsible for expanding that company globally. And so I thought, let me read about the country that I love, but I haven't been living in for the last 20 years. I grew up in Victoria, went to UVic, I love Canada. And so I started that journey by reading two documents. One was the Hansard debates, as of course all of you have read. Truthfully, actually I had no idea what the Hansard debates were. But it was basically the debates on the Confederation and the provinces discussing the challenges with the Americans coming up and having episodic bouts of violence with the Canadians. It was the provinces battling over what a confederation meant. And then I read something else, and that was about Pierre Esprit Radisson, a book called Bushrunner, and the risks that he took in setting up Hudson Bay Company, which were astonishing. I've named our factory in Ottawa after him. It's called the Radisson. So for folks booking hotels, don't come to a factory. But it helped me frame what ultimately is in this short piece, which is we as a country have taken enormous risks. In fact, the reason that this country exists is in many ways sort of a venture bet on the Hudson Bay Company. We were a company before we were a country. Confederation hits, so that happens for 200 years. Confederation hits, and we start to be much more conservative. We risk less. We do more, but also less. We sort of muddle through. And then the 60s, 70s, and 80s hits, and you see a phenomenal amount of defense innovation. We built the first passenger jet. I think there's probably a debate to be had about that as well. We built the first 2 operational drones. We built the first autonomous submarine. We built an enormous amount and led the world in our sector. And we can do it again. We have the talent, we have the people. I have helped build a $60 billion defense company, I think arguably the most disruptive defense company of the last generation. We have the talent here to do it. In fact, many of the people that I worked with at Anduril were Canadian. In fact, the woman who led the CCA program was Canadian. The primary architect of Lattice is from Edmonton. So that's my basic message. I will read this Canoe and the Crown and then get off the stage promptly because I'm very much looking forward to the debates in the next panel. So the Canoe and the Crown, Canada's past and its path forward. Canada has always been a country of 2 stories. One is written in Hansard debates and legislative preambles, etched into marble in Ottawa and celebrated every July 1st. The other is told in logbooks, oral histories, fading maps, a history of canoes cutting through Blackwater rivers, of trading posts rising in remote forests, of men and women pushing beyond the known. Both are true, but only one can guide us into the century ahead. The official story of Canada begins in 1867. It is the story of Macdonald and Cartier, of the fathers of Confederation gathered in Charlottetown and Quebec City to design a country that would be safe, stable, and enduring. These were men shaped by the failures of 1848 revolutions, by the trauma of America's Civil War, and by a pervasive fear of mob rule and Republican excesses. They built Canada as a bulwark against chaos, a dominion under the crown that prized order over passion, gradualism over rupture, and compromise over conviction. The dominion they designed reflected those instincts. It was federal but cautious in its decentralization. It preserved monarchical systems of ballast against populism. Its economy was anchored to an imperial trade routes and British capital. Its motto, peace, order, and good government, spoke volumes about priorities and still arguably does. And for a century and a half, this constitutional conservatism has served us reasonably well. We are safe. We are a safe, predictable country. We muddle through. We avoid extremes. But this is only half the story. The deeper Canada, the one that predates Confederation and transcends it, was built not in a parliamentary chambers, but in the wilderness. It was forged, as Alex said earlier, by coureurs de bois and by voyageurs who paddled thousands of kilometers into uncharted interior. It was shaped by indigenous guides like Thana Del Thor and Matanabe, who taught survival and navigation long before surveyors arrived. It was financed by bold commercial enterprises like the Hudson's Bay Company, whose charter predates the country itself by 2 centuries and whose fur brigades were, in effect, the first continental supply chains. This is true for the Americans as well. We invented adventure capitalism prior to the Americans. These were not bureaucrats, but builders. They were risk takers and deal makers, often operating at the edge of law and empire. Alexander Mackenzie reached the Arctic Ocean by canoe in 1789 and the Pacific in 1793, 12 years before Lewis and Clark set out from St. Louis. George Simpson, the little emperor of Hudson's Bay, ran a commercial empire that spanned a continent from Labrador to the Columbia River. Catherine Parr Traill and Susanna Moody chronicled the raw improvisational struggle and settlement, while entrepreneurs like John Molson and Timothy Eaton, frankly also Toby Lukey and Jim Balsillie, turned colonial outposts into thriving markets. This Canada, restless, ambitious, commercial, is too often treated as a footnote in our national narrative. It shouldn't be, because the future now demands more of it. It's too easy to see our current challenges as similar to those that shaped the Confederation debate, fending off an American invasion and stitching together jurisdictions and colonies. The reality is we are confronting a far more fluid, competitive, and unforgiving world, one defined by technological upheaval, geopolitical realignment, and existential tests of sovereignty in the Arctic and cyberspace and space and beyond. If such a world, caution and incrementalism will not suffice. They risk consigning us to irrelevance. What will matter instead are precisely the qualities embodied by those early explorers and entrepreneurs: speed, ingenuity, risk tolerance, and a willingness to operate far from familiar ground. We need more Mackenzies, not less. Canadians willing to strike out into the unknown, whether that's in artificial intelligence, space, quantum computing, resource development in the North. We need more Simpsons, leaders who build continental-scale businesses and global supply chains. And we need governments that understand their role not as guardians of the status quo, but as catalysts for ambition. This does not mean rejecting the achievements of 1867. The institutions the fathers of Confederation built remain essential, but they must now serve on platforms for dynamism rather than obstacles to it. Our regulatory regimes, procurement systems, and public sector risk appetites were designed for a different era. That is manifestly true, as we all know. They must be re-engineered to support rapid experimentation and decisive action, the modern equivalence of loading a canoe with trade goods and pushing west. There is ultimately no contradiction between these two Canadas, the explorers and the legislators. The traders and the constitutionalists were all nation builders in their own ways. But if the first century of our history was defined by the architecture of order, the next must be defined by the spirit of exploration. The future will not reward the most cautious country, it will reward the most bold. Our choice then is clear. We can remain the Canada of 1867, safe, stable, and secondary, or we can become once again the Canada of Mackenzie, Simpson, a country that ventures farther, builds faster, and dreams bigger. The latter is harder, riskier, and more uncertain, but as this room knows, it is also more faithful to who we truly are. Thank you.